Thank you very much. I want to say that first, we, the People of Color Caucus in the Oregon Legislature, will be highlighting 3 proposals before the legislature in what I believe will be a special session sometime in the next 2 weeks or so.
Excuse me, Senator Frederick, I'm going to have to put you on hold for a moment. I understand that the live link is not working. And we need to make sure that as a public meeting that the public is able to access this. So can I put you on hold for just a sec?
Sure.
We'll just hang out and let our fabulous tech folks figure it out.
Commissioner, it looks like we are up and running now.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Keelan. My apologies, Senator Frederick. Please begin again.
I'll start again.
You'll start from the beginning.
Okay. Let's start it off. Thanks again, Commissioner. We, the Black Indigenous People of Color Caucus in the Oregon Legislature, will be highlighting 3 proposals before the legislature in what I believe will be a special session and sometime in the next 2 weeks or so. First, we need an independent group to investigate and, if need be, prosecute any excessive use of force incidents in the state. That could be a team set up by the Attorney General made up of investigators and attorneys from outside the county where the case took place, as well as not from counties contiguous to the county involved. Second, a clause in police union contracts must prescribe discipline in a matrix that arbitrators cannot rule outside of and reset all of the past arbitrator rulings that give low discipline decisions or dismissal of cases. Third, a bicameral, bipartisan work group which should be created to develop police and public safety proposals specifically designed to address the racial inequalities identified clearly in the last few weeks. Now, those issues can include a list, and you'll have to pardon me, but I'm going to go down this list right now. A transparent database of disciplined peace officers available to agencies and the public. A definition of use of force and the delineation of when force rises to the level of investigation. The elimination of chokeholds and toxic gas, the demilitarization of police forces and the elimination of military hardware, the creation and support of citizen review boards with the power to investigate and subpoena individuals to testify, the creation of a system of clear financial responsibility for unwarranted assaults on citizens, no longer relying on city and county insurance policies to pay for settlements of physical attacks on citizens. Drug and alcohol testing after each incident, stricter recruiting, psychological, cultural screening and training that includes attention not only to the training in the DPSST, but also vetting consultants to ensure compliance with guidelines. Reevaluating the use of body cameras and the storage and access of that footage. Requirements that police officers live in the communities they serve. Open union negotiations. Underlying all of this is a need to completely reevaluate the goals of public safety priorities in the state and local governments. This includes an intense look at the true needs of local communities regarding who officers most commonly encounter, the mental health and drug abuse issues, domestic violence situations, versus the need for display of intimidation and weapons. Do we change the overall concept of public safety from one of law enforcement, expecting and promoting the primary goal of catching the bad guys, or do we determine that public safety is what we want with our peace officers? I've heard from my neighbors. They simply want to be safe, knowing that they can depend on the officials around them to treat them and their neighbors fairly. They see the need for counselors, health professionals, conflict resolution, and people who can handle violence when it occurs. They want a reset, an understanding that the present approach is not working and we have waited too long and long enough for change. The present police system does not police itself. That cannot happen if the police see themselves as an occupying force outside of the communities they interact with. That cannot happen if the model for public safety is a military one, where control and intimidation are seen as the only motivators. A change from obvious military uniforms might be one approach. A recognition that calling yourself a peace officer, as an Ashland officer recently said, doesn't change the way people see you. It changes the way you see other people. I want to thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Fredericks. Do any of your other colleagues have written statements to start? Seeing no hands. Do any of my colleagues have any opening statements that they'd like to put on the record? Not seeing any hands. So Lou, Senator Fredericks, let's talk about one by one what your legislative proposal is. You talked about body cams. As you know, the bill that was passed in the Oregon legislature actually was not a accountability bill. It was a bill that actually made body cam footage owned by the police. The police would be the ones who would decide when it became public or whether it would become public. The bill said that the police would own the body cam footage. So what we currently have as law around body cam footage does absolutely nothing to hold police accountable. And so,
well, I've got to. Now, I don't like to disagree with you on things for a number of reasons. Mostly because you are as tenacious as I am about something. So we just sort of go with things. Let me just put it this way: the body cam bill that was presented and was passed. There's another clause in it that says there's a clause in it that says that the footage is owned by the police. That there's another clause in it that says that the courts decide whether the footage can be presented. And I think that has been interpreted. The intent of that bill, the intent was to make it available. To have body cams, to make the footage available, but not to avoid some privacy issues, and also to try to make sure that we can access it in a way that was going to be effective for victims and for others, so that they could deal with things. I think it has been poorly interpreted. I think we need to rethink and relook at that particular bill and relook at the body cam thing, because the intent. Because that was my bill. The intent was to make sure that we actually had body cams footage available to people, and that did not happen. I am most upset about the fact that it has taken 7 years, while other agencies across the state have managed to put in body cams and use them appropriately. In many cases, the Portland Police Bureau has not. It has stalled. It has put barriers up, it has given excuses, and at the same time has received money each year to do something.
I finally fixed that, Senator.
I know you did, but the fact that they were still getting money,
yes,
still, and we're not providing things, that is very upsetting to me. So as I said, one of the proposals is to try to take a look at the body cam issue and figure out things. But there's another aspect to this too. There are two of them. One is we've seen across the country that body cams necessarily have not stopped the kind of nonsense that we've seen, the kind of intimidation, the kind of bad action that we thought that they might. It still surprises me, and it surprises me here in Portland, when we saw police officers in Portland in the last few days attack people, and yes, knowing that they had cameras.
Yes.
People watching them, without understanding that what is it that you don't get about why all of this is taking place? Part of the reason it's taking place is because we did have footage, we did have video, finally, of some of the things that have been taking place around Black men in particular. So there's a culture thing that we really need to be dealing with as well. We have to address it. The body cam is a small part of that, but I think it begins to address some of the things.
Thank you, Senator Fredericks. I think you and I will have to disagree whether there's a return on investment and how much money it costs to provide body cams and then store the data. You and I will have to respectfully disagree with each other. In my mind, body cams have done nothing to keep community members safe. We have seen body cam footage all over the country, and clearly police don't care if they're being caught on camera abusing their power. I know Representative Bynum wants to get in on this conversation, but let me also say, I know the Speaker of the House has been a strong champion of body cams, and I've spoken with her many times because she's been trying hard to push Portland to have body cams. What will keep us safe is a new approach to policing. Body cams is not the magic solution that many people think it is. And
Well,
in fact, at the federal level, there is a big bill that will include body cams. And I have asked our congressional delegation to change that so that they would buy cameras for low-income people so they can film the police, because that's been the only thing in my mind that's ever changed police behavior and has ever held police accountable. Representative Bynum, I know you're chomping at the bits to get in.
Go for it, Janelle.
Thank you, Commissioner. I want to be clear. It is our goal as legislators to ensure the safety of all people in the state and provide a framework for safety. From my recollection, the testimony we heard in the Judiciary Committee under Chair Williamson indicated that other departments around the state had been able to successfully deploy body cams and have not seen the type of escalation, the type of behavior that we are seeing out of some of our police force in Portland. And so I guess I want to be very clear. Is it your single objection, like Commissioner Hardesty's single objection to police cameras that is, I guess, thwarting the forward progress of police camera discussion in the Portland Police Bureau, and the other members are capitulating? Because I tend to agree with Senator Frederick. I have colleagues in other police departments around the country who have said that they in fact believe that it was an improvement to their policing. It made their officers feel safer. It made their community members feel safer. And so I would respectfully disagree as well. But I'm putting the question on the table. Is the whole council there, or is it you?
It is the whole council. In fact, the
I
mayor.
would prefer if they spoke for themselves unless there's a vote on the record.
The vote did not happen because there was not city council consensus that was the right investment of the millions of dollars that we would have to invest. And let me tell you, one of the reasons why I was adamantly opposed, and I certainly will allow my colleagues to jump in and share their perspective, was our former mayor, Charlie Hales, negotiated an agreement with the police union even before the public had an opportunity to develop a policy about how body cameras would be implemented. And the agreement that was reached was actually what I said, right? Was that basically the police would own the body camera footage and there would be almost no access from the public unless the police agreed to it. Commissioner Udaley or Commissioner Fritz, if you would like to weigh in on what your opinion is and has been around body cams, I think our legislative folks would like to hear from you.
Sure, I'd be happy to speak to that. Not in the exact place that Commissioner Hardesty is in. I was generally supportive of body cams. They continue to be one of many solutions called for to address misconduct and use of force. I had my team look into the data, which is limited because it's a fairly new practice. And what we found is that is kind of still out, vary from city to city based on a variety of factors. So I couldn't comfortably say whether they would make a difference in Portland or not. So I'm actually very open to that conversation. That kind of money and effort. I have a lot of additional concerns around privacy, who owns the footage, what the public access is to it, et cetera. But most importantly, whether we feel that with where we're at with our police bureau in our city, that it's a worthwhile endeavor.
Thank you, Commissioner Udaley. Commissioner Fritz, would you like to weigh in on this conversation?
Yes, thank you. I've had my hand up. Thank you, all of you, for being here. I apologize that I'm not on video. I actually I don't have the technology at home to be able to do that, and I can't have anybody over to fix it for me. So that's really that's why I'm on the phone. And thank you, Representative Bynum and Senator Frederick, for your comments. I'm really looking forward to hearing more from each of you. For me, it was partly Commissioner Hardesty's leadership and her role on the council, and partly that looking at the cost benefit and what else we could invest the millions of dollars that body cams were costing. And then also some of the privacy issues. As some of you may know, I have been very concerned about public records, in particular emergency response being public records. We, several sessions ago, tried to, we had a discussion about whether 911 calls should be available to the media and broadcast. So I worry about people who would be calling for assistance on the worst day of their lives and having that available to people who are just looking for sensationalism. And then there's the question of, when is the camera allowed to be turned off? Who controls that? So I had many questions. For the most part, the decision was made as part of the budget process. We were going to have a work session, and that didn't happen. So, like Commissioner Udaley, I'm looking to learn from you and from others to hear from you. What are your thinking? And it's really good to have more voices in this discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Fritz. Representative Sanchez, do you want to weigh in on this conversation? I know you and I've had this conversation a lot over the years.
Sure. Well, let me just say, it's interesting to me that obviously the whole idea of cameras in general are bringing a lot of things to light, but I truly it is quite stunning to me that these things continue to happen despite the fact that people have cameras on their bodies, and it's almost a slap in the face that you feel okay with this. So the issue to me is more of a systemic struggle with police and their own feeling of their empowerment or being emboldened to do whatever they choose, body camera or not. Mm-hmm. So I think in some instances they may have helped certain situations or put some clarity to certain situations. I'm not sure that it's certainly not the end all be all. It's not the answer to the issue at all. There is more to be said. There are more, again, as I believe, truly systemic issues that need to be addressed first before body cameras will make any difference at all. So.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to weigh in on this topic? Because we have many others to talk about. One of the things I would love to talk about really is around the psychologists. We have one psychologist that determines who's fit to be a police officer in Oregon. This particular psychologist does all the interviews for most of the major law enforcement agencies throughout the state. And it's been a pet peeve of mine for a bazillion years about why we would have one guy determining who is fit to be a law enforcement officer. So is there any effort in the legislature to actually change that so that we have more than one perspective on who has the expertise to qualify to be a law enforcement officer?
Well, let me speak to that because the attempt was to make sure, first of all, in the 2019 session, we passed a bill calling for a screening of police officers statewide. We did not have that. We discovered, and the many of the folks who were in law enforcement discovered that only certain departments were in fact doing any kind of psychological screening. as one sheriff someplace or police chief someplace in a small town said, I want to be able to hire anybody I want to hire, even if it's my cousin who's crazy. So you had that as one end of the spectrum, if you will. It is the ability for us to find people who can do the screening is not limited to that one psychologist.
That's right.
It's not. I mean, it's available. There are now folks who we set it up so that it would not be limited to one person or one company, one area. Other folks have not stepped in, and we have not gone after those folks apparently, and that needs to change. That's part of what I hope we'll see. We needed to broaden it out, but up until a certain point, we only had one person who was willing to step forward, and a part of that was because in many cases the psychologists, the counselors, have never dealt with police officers. If you have somebody who comes in as an academic, basically doing an interview, not understanding what the PTSD issues are for police officers, or what you're looking for in a police officer, that's as bad basically as having just one person. So we need to expand that number, and I think that we can do that. I don't know whether that's necessarily a legislative issue so much as a free market kind of thing. Let's go and find these people. Let's find out who actually can do this.
Well, Senator Frederick, let me just say that police agencies have not been willing to go out and find other psychologists. And it's not that the free market is making that available. It's the laziness of the agencies who are accustomed to having one individual make all the decisions about who is and who isn't. In Portland, we actually did a pilot project the last time the psychologist contract was up. We demanded that that there be a subcontract that would include a person of color psychologist or somebody else, anybody other than the one guy who's been doing it forever, right? This guy's made a small fortune off police agencies in Oregon because he is the only one. And so what we found was that there's thousands of psychologists out there with the expertise to be able to review whether or not people are qualified to be police officers or law enforcement in a state. But it is the agency's laziness that they get accustomed to. I know this guy, so we're just going to keep contracting over and over and over again. And I think it may need a legislative fix that makes sure that we are not overburdening one company with the sole task of determining who is qualified to serve in that capacity. Before we go further, I would be remiss if I didn't really appreciate both you, Senator Fredericks, and you, Representative Bynum, for your strong leadership over the last few years and really pushing our police accountability bill in Salem. You've just been spectacular in making sure that that arbitration bill moved. And it's not your fault that at the finish line, you did not have a quorum to get it through. And so I just want to take a moment to just really appreciate the hard work that I know both of you have done over the years to try to help us have a more accountable system.
Well, thank you. But let me also thank your staff and the rest of the city council. You've all been steadfast in getting people out there, and your team in City Hall has been outstanding. They have helped a great deal. So thank you again. We've Representative Bynum is just she's been amazing on this. So.
Well, thank you. Representative Bynum, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, I had a couple points I wanted to make. Thank you, Commissioner. The first is some of the work that my office has done, and I've tried to lead by personal example, is destigmatizing mental health, especially as we've had to respond in this COVID environment. Our mental health, I think many of my colleagues probably would admit to joining me in seeking out mental health counseling, understanding how we deal with stress, our frontline law enforcement officers are placed in positions that are very stressful. If you add to them potentially some military service, that is enough to put a person in a situation where they make very poor decisions. So I would encourage, I don't know what your standard is for mental health supports going forward on a regular basis, but I would strongly encourage the department to encourage people to seek out counseling. That's the first point I want to make. The second point is mental health counseling post use of force, post seeing someone pass away, post these traumatic situations, I think is important to invest in. So I want to make sure that after some big event happens, that we are taking care of our law enforcement, and not voluntarily. Like, you need to go talk to somebody because what you saw or what you experienced or what you did wasn't a good thing. And then the last point I want to make is work that our office has been doing in terms of growing the number of mental health professionals in the state. We have seen some protectionism. I'm just going to call it what it is. We are working with the governor's office to look at all of our licensing commissions and boards, so that we open it up to people of color, so that we open it up to culturally responsive practices, and that we make sure that the mental health network in the state is sufficient also for our rural Oregonians. So those are three things in the mental health space in qualifying people to be law enforcement officers. Those are things that we still need to invest in that go far beyond whether this person is just fit for duty. It's the continuum of the spectrum that we need to invest in.
Thank you, Representative. I couldn't agree more. And here in Portland, we have started to invest in wellness programs for our first responders. And we are committed to continuing those wellness programs. Now, what we haven't done is mandate that people go and seek support. But as we build it out, I believe that people will have more confidence in being able to utilize mental health services, because I believe, just like everyone else, there's a stigma still attached to seeking support. And I have certainly been working with all our first responder units, especially since the pandemic started, and they've all been on the front line with the pandemic. And now with the rebellion that's taking place, they're also on the front line with that. And it is really important that we make sure that we provide those necessary resources to our first responders. So I couldn't agree more that that is absolutely necessary. And I think at the state level, you can help us mandate things that we can only encourage people to do at the local level. So thank you very much. Anybody else have anything that they want to just put on the table? I see I just muted myself. Yes, I see Representative Meek, who hasn't spoken yet. Representative Meek, welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you. And thanks for inviting us today. Yeah, just wanted to kind of elaborate back to what our full, our hopes and our work is going to be working on, is that we need to change the full, training process, recruitment process in which our law enforcers and our police departments recruit and train and retain our peace officers. And absent that, we are never going to really make any changes. I think what happens right now, our communities have awoken. I've been in meetings with amazingly enough of Rotaries, chambers, members of my community, phone calls, and every one of them is asking me, what are we going to do, Mark? What are we doing now? And they are truly passionate about this. And this is white, black, brown, all of us are participating and very concerned that now is the time. A lot of them, unfortunately, it's silence is, complicity, they don't want to be in that group any longer. They feel that now's the time. So I just want to put on the record that us, the People of Color Caucus, the legislature, we have the political will, and now it's going to be a matter of our leadership, and our leadership does too, to work together. And I'm extending a hand out to our law enforcement agencies and those unions and associations to come to the table, be ready to make some changes, but allow us to create an environment in which our community feels safe, both, walking in their neighborhoods, knocking on their constituents' doors, and just feeling, that they are welcome and in general. And I think the work we're going to be doing is going to be important, and we're going to do some immediate work this session. And thank you, Senator Frederick, for those concepts. And but absent that, we're going to be working hard in 2021 to bring more change. So thanks, and thank you for having us today.
Thank you, Representative Meek. And let me just say, in conversations with Governor Brown, we've talked about the need to actually get rid of everybody at DPSST. And for the public, the Department of Public Safety Standard and Practices, we need to get rid of everybody and start over. Because clearly when someone can come from the Portland Gang Enforcement Unit, retire, go to West Lynn, falsely accuse an African-American man of a crime, arrest him and start a criminal prosecution, and then that gentleman, and I use that term loosely, retires from West Lynn and then becomes the number 2 person in our training facility, that is absolutely frightening to the public. That we have this revolving door of really bad actors. And so in my conversation with the governor, I said, we have to just get rid of everybody and start over.
Yeah, the system is broken. It's broken. We need to fix it. We need from the foundation level all the way up to the top.
And I hope that the People of Color Caucus will be advocating for a new model of training, which includes having community and police be co-trainers. The only time the community should not be there will be when they're doing tactical training with equipments and automobiles. Other than that, the only way we can create community police officers is if we have community and police training community police officers side by side. So that's my perspective. Representative Lawrence Spencer, I see your hand. I'm going to go to Representative Sanchez, who's next. I'm not losing any of you. This is our conversation. Okay, Representative Sanchez, please.
So sort of a follow-up on Representative Meek. Those are some of the issues that I get frustrated with all the time. As I mentioned earlier, this is a systemic issue, right? This has been a long time and clearly embedded in training and all of those different issues. One of the things that I was very frustrated about is sort of losing things in certain bills, but I have been adamant all this time that psychological evaluation needs to happen prior to somebody even going to training.
Yes.
Because what we know is, I come from the world of domestic violence, right? I do that work. And what we know is as shelters, we didn't tell the cops where the shelter was because we knew some of them were abusers. And so we know going in that sometimes people go into that profession because they're abusers and or they have issues with power and control.
Yes.
And power and control is what leads to, that situation where you feel like you can, as I said, despite the body camera, you can do whatever you want because you're going to get away with it. That's the part that really needs to be looked at prior to even going into this field of work. Are these folks abusers? Are these folks people who want to have power and control? And if we can determine that prior to even putting them through training, spending the money on that training, and then again, create that possibility of transparency so that we know that somebody doesn't go through, the situation where they then move on to something else and become abusive. Those things are things that we need to pay attention to and be looking at and catch before they even become huge issues within our institutions.
Thank you very much, Representative. You're absolutely right. Representative Lawrence Spencer. Sorry.
It's okay, Commissioner. Thank you. One of the things that you just hit on in your previous comment
was the ability of our law enforcement officers to move from one jurisdiction to the next without a level of accountability that our private citizens would have to deal with, right? I think one of the best analogies that I've heard in recent times has been akin to the database that sexual predators and offenders have to register with. There needs to be, and I believe that our caucus has proposed policy to this end, but there needs to be a database that says that puts up roadblocks, right? That says, okay, this officer has had this infraction, they've had this infraction, they've had this infraction. Where do we stop it? Where do we cut things off such that we don't get to a George Floyd situation, right? We know that in the case of that officer, he was guilty of previous cases of excessive force, right? He was guilty of abusing his power, right? He was guilty also of, getting jobs outside of the police force based on his positionality in the police, getting private contracts, and also abusing people through private security contracts and things like that. So there needs to be this level of accountability where we hold these people who are trained, right, who are responsible to the community and have to then, be entered in a database so that they can't go from PPB to Westland to, across the state and continue the same pattern of abuse across, our communities. So I think that's one of the things that we need to do. And I know that our federal delegation is working on producing a database whereby you can't go state by state and do this either, right? So there has to be a level of accountability for our law enforcement so that we don't have the same bad actors going from jurisdiction to jurisdiction to jurisdiction and perpetuating the same types of behavior.
Thank you, Representative Lawrence Spencer. Spence, you hit on something that's been a pet peeve of mine for a while, which is law enforcement working as private security for companies using their uniforms. And I'm hoping that something can be done at the state level. I don't like the idea of Portland police officers guarding the Apple store on behalf of a multinational, international corporation. I don't think that's appropriate for them to be using their police uniform for private gain. And we have allowed that to happen quite a bit all across the state of Oregon. One of the other things that, as you were mentioning databases, I want to go back to Senator Lou Frederick, because the racial profiling work that was done clearly identified Portland Police Bureau as the only agency that had data that implied that there were some racially discriminatory practices taking place. And because of that report, the legislation actually requires the local public safety coordinating council to hold public meetings, which haven't happened, and COVID is part of it. But I also believe that COVID could be used as an excuse to not engage the community around the data that has already been collected. Senator Frederick, do you have an update on that database and what the plan is moving forward with that information?
Well, two things. One is I think it's going to be important to recognize that we're going to have to do something at the state level, because at the federal level, that's not going to happen. The House or the U.S. House may pass something, but the U.S. Senate is deadlocked, and not deadlocked, but determined to not pass it. So we're going to have to do something at the state level to try to deal with any sort of database on police officers and understanding what the discipline issue is about. Regarding the profiling bill, we need to. You're correct. Right now the excuse is because they can't meet, that they haven't been able to do anything. That's no longer going to be an excuse, and we now know, as we can see with this system right here, that we can meet. So we've got to push that to make sure that that's the case. I've got to also say that it took 8 years or seven years to get the profiling, even a profiling pilot underway. We finally got it done. Then we finally went to a point where we were able to get the statistics that you just mentioned that showed a number of things. But one of the things that it showed as well was of who was being pulled over and why, because attached to that profiling bill was a clause that talked about the possession of a controlled substance that went from being a felony to a misdemeanor. And the result of that was fewer Black folks were pulled over and charged with it, because a felony, a misdemeanor, just didn't have the same kind of points that you might get with a felony. So we saw that take place pretty clearly. So we've got to look at that. We've got to really understand what we can do after we see those statistics, not only in Portland but also in a couple of other places as well. That's what I hope to see us do.
Thank you. Representative Bynum.
Thank you, Commissioner. I wanted to make a quick point about kind of the way in which I guess I see things from a management standpoint. I always like to focus on what I want to see. Right. And today we are rightfully talking about quirks in the system, systemic failures, how our system is built on things that aren't serving us well. But I also want to place a quick highlight on some things that I would like to see more of. Mm-hmm. One of my constituents who's in Multnomah County and serves us as Erica Pruitt, and her mother is Carmen Sylvester, our first African-American female police officer. And I hold her up because I think that it is important for us to build a bench of strong community leaders within the law enforcement profession. For years, my kids have gone to the Portland Police Bureau Camp Rosenbaum, mm-hmm. and they hold that up. My 18-year-old and actually all four of them, they hold that up as the single most positive experience that they have had with law enforcement in their entire lives. Mm-hmm. I have pictures of them with, I think his name is Israel, Big Iz, I think is his name. And they remember when I couldn't meet the bus to pick them up, that they got to ride home in a police car. And it wasn't in the back of a police car with their hands behind their back for something they didn't do or something that was overblown. It was a positive experience where these officers were taking time out of their lives, out of their week, to love them, to encourage them, and to nurture them. And so I think as we have this conversation about our DPSST, and as chair of the Judiciary Committee, you have my commitment that I will continue to make reforms in that area and ask tough questions. But I also think that it is important, especially for this new entering class, which I believe you have, I don't remember, is it 90 new recruits, something like that?
No, it's not that high. I do have.
I wish it were.
Yeah, so do I. I actually have the number here. I can tell you in a couple of minutes.
So you have this class of new recruits. What foundation are we giving them?
Yes.
What are we expecting of them as they enter as new recruits? The most diverse class I think you've ever had. What do we expect of them? And what do we expect the people who are already there to pass down to them? So I think that also needs to be part of the conversation. The community is very angry for all the right reasons about our failures of the system. But I do think we need to make sure that our kids have more experiences like Camp Rosenbaum, mm-hmm. which was canceled this year. Our kids need to have more experiences where police are out in the community doing the right things. And we also need to make sure that we invest in the mental health response units instead of expecting a police officer to handle a social issue. So I wanted to put that on the record.
Thank you so much for that. I think you're absolutely right. And so between 2019 and 2020, Portland Police have in fact hired 94 officers. Out of the 94, and I would say probably most of them have not gone through the academy yet, right? But there's a big group that's on hold because, of course, the academy's closed. But once again, the demographic information tells a story about who will be police officers in the city of Portland. 66 of them are Caucasian, 13 are Hispanic, 5 are Asian, 5 are African American, and 5 are 2 or more races, right? So again, we are overwhelmed with white males who desire to be Portland police officers. 75 of the potential new hires are men and 19 are women. So that's the data as of right now. I see you, Representative Lawrence Spence. I'm going to come to you in just a sec. But I don't want to lose my train of thought because I'm old, and if I move to something else, I'll forget. And so one other thing that comes up for me is that we have no accountability for all the private security firms that operate throughout the state. We can get no demographic data. We don't know who is being impacted, who is being arrested, and what the outcomes of those cases are with these private security firms. Some of them are armed and some of them are not armed. And I am frustrated because they are private firms. I don't have access to the demographic data about who is being impacted by all these private security firms. And I'm hopeful that our legislators will be able to correct that and require these private firms, as part of them being licensed, that they would have to provide annual information that is demographically based on who is employed with them and who is being impacted by their security services. Representative Lawrence Spence, you are on.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just had a question about the data you just gave us. I wanted to know if you had any information about where those police officers live, if they're actually from the community. One of the things that we talk about when we want to see better policing and better community relations in police without having to have to enroll in a camp or do something, you want to see them coming from the community so that they understand those needs of that community and they're more rooted in that community. So I just wanted to know if you had that data available.
I do not have that data available, but I would be happy to try to acquire that data. I just asked our last police chief if she would provide me the demographic data for the hires over the last year. And one question I did not ask is where they lived. And so I am happy to go back and ask them to provide that information and make it available to my legislative folks.
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing in response to that is that I think that is crucial data that we should start to collect. Because again, when we start to have this radical reimagining of what we want policing or community policing to look like, it needs to be people who are rooted in community, who have, experiences with culturally diverse members of our community, who have experiences with people who are going to approach policing differently than they will, right? And approach a badge or someone who has this conception of authority, right? Or is this representation of the state, right? So I think that making sure that we have that and that it's accessible to the public would be a critical point in how we move forward.
Thank you very much, Representative. I see Representative Meek has been trying to get in. Representative.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I wanted to follow up with a statement or the discussion that Representative Lawrence Spence had brought up about these actors moving across jurisdictions. And what I'd like to do is put a marker down that when we talk about hiring and recruiting, we look at their fitness. Are they able to walk? Are they coordinated? Can they run? Are they physically fit? And you always draw on your own experiences. I served in the security police in the Air Force, and I got my associates in industrial security. And so I had some training, but part of my approval process was that I couldn't be a thief. I couldn't be an alcoholic. And So I think part of what we need to do as part of this training process or this recruitment process, we need to have not only a physical fitness standard, but a moral fitness standard. And maybe because you have to be and remain in physical condition, you have to run or work out. But what do we do to train their response muscles and their inner response to their community? And I think one of the things we need to make as part of this new standard, which hopefully on these work groups that this is discussed, is I guess their ability. Do they have anger management problems? Do they need to, or are they easily, pushed over the top? And there's training that they can go through on a hopefully annual basis, and an initial hopefully some strong training to begin with, that will allow them to to not overreact, to be able to focus on what is really going on and not bring their personal issues that they had at home to work. And I know it's difficult and it's hard for them to not take their work home, but I think in order for us to really recruit and support a new, law enforcement peace officer corps, that we're going to have to go that deep to try to into a level of fitness, their mental fitness to perform these duties. And if they don't cut it, then they're moving on. And if they make certain, if they have violations with their fitness, they should be removed and should not be allowed to return to that type of work. So, thank you.
You bring up some very provocative questions in my mind, Representative, because the reality is that what we know is that it is rare for a law enforcement officer to be disciplined at all, regardless of how egregious the behavior is, right? And so we have no mechanism to say that there's been a totality of this type of behavior because it's so rare, right? But you can go to any community and they will tell you what police officers are abusive, what police officers the community wouldn't talk to if their life depended on it. And so how do we build in the kind of accountability that we all want if in fact, as of now, it's the exception for a law enforcement officer to be disciplined, not the norm. I see Senator Frederick.
And I want to let Senator Frederick, I know he has got a lot of experience on this, but one of the major ways in which we can put this on the record, if somebody in the public files a complaint against you, that needs to be addressed. That goes on your record. And if you have to have some type of hearing, the public needs to have the power brought back to them. Yes. I don't even care if you were arrested for armed robbery. If you were mistreated in any way, they should have a right to complain and say, that they were treated, well, if you freely gave yourself up, you don't need to be booked and be bruised and battered in the process. So only through public involvement and the ability to file a complaint that needs to be addressed and it can't be swept under the rug. That's one of the first ways, but I want to hear Senator Frederick. I know you have some great ideas too.
Oh, thank you very much, Representative Meek. The fact is that there's another aspect to this that I think is really important. The other officers know who shouldn't be out there.
That's right.
And they aren't coming forward. They are not stepping forward. The question is, why aren't they stepping forward? I think that may have to do with who they end up having to respond to, what their supervisors are like, what the status of those folks who are violating basic public norms, what their status is within the force. There are enough stories that I have from friends of mine who are present and former officers that tell me about how when they stepped forward or when they did things as simple as going to a neighborhood barbecue in their neighborhood, that they were disciplined by their higher ups for not wearing their uniform and acting as though they were somehow above the other people in their neighborhood. If you talk with some of the some of the past and present members of Noble, they have their own stories. They can tell you them right away about the Noble is the National Organization of Blacks in Law Enforcement. They can tell you their own stories about not being able to step forward and say, hey, that guy I don't want to work with. He's a trouble. He's a troublemaker. He creates all sorts of problems. They know these things. And the issue for me is why they aren't stepping forward. What is stopping them? That's one of the issues. The other thing you should know is, as I believe, and I was just trying to find it, I couldn't find it away, but I remember for a couple of reasons. One is that there was a court ruling in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, that said that the city of Portland could not require officers to live in a jurisdiction. So that's one of the issues that we struggle with, that court ruling. Now I know this because I bought my house from a former police officer, and the reason that he was able to move out of the city of Portland was because of that court ruling. So I remember that was having talked with him about that. So this is an issue that we have to figure out how we address. Not sure how we address it in terms of the state, the legislative thing, but I wanted to make sure that we put it forward as a concern.
Senator Frederick, this shows how old you and I are, because I actually remember when the city of Portland was paying incentives to Portland police officers to live in the city. And we could not get one Portland police officer to take advantage of the incentive of home ownership to live within the city of Portland. And of course, as you know, Chief Moose did live in the neighborhood, and he was, of course, an African-American man who bought a house right smack dab in the middle of inner Northeast. And so this has certainly been something we've been talking about for a while. Commissioner Fritz, I see you want to weigh in. I just want to see if Senator Fredericks wanted to weigh in again, just based on how old both of us are in dealing with this issue.
Well, the age, I understand, you're absolutely correct. And I've been looking at this issue for some time. The problem is that we have not decided that we can address it directly, because there's another aspect to this that's important. We do not only are folks not living in the neighborhood, but they are antagonistic to the neighborhood. They're coming into the neighborhood with an idea that they are an occupying force. Again, going back to the militarization approach, they're coming in saying we are in control here, and you need to be intimidated by us. We are in control. You are not necessarily our fellow citizens. We are going to approach you as an enemy. The military phrase is something on the order of, I've forgotten what the phrase is, but it's something on the order of understanding what the rules of engagement are. Mm-hmm. Rules of engagement is not something that you talk about when you're talking about your next door neighbor. Mm-hmm. Rules of engagement is a military term that says, you are the enemy, I am the occupier. That's the rules of engagement. We have to get past that mindset, and part of that has got to be making sure that people are in fact connected with the neighborhood, connected with each other.
And I'm going to go to Commissioner Fritz, but let me just assure you, I think what I want to say to you collectively is that there's an expectation that both in your short legislative session and in the next legislative session, that you will be bold, that you will not be tinkering around the edges, that you won't be just showing up systems that are unjust, right? And I know that your community is depending on you to be the vocal people that are demanding your colleagues step up in a way that they've never imagined themselves stepping up. And so I just want to put that challenge out there. Your community is going to be looking at you saying, is that all you're doing? Really? Right? We need you to be bold and really think about what are the things that you've been thinking about for years that we've actually never put forward in the legislative body, that now when you have the public at your back demanding action, that you will have the opportunity to do. And I'm going to give you all an opportunity to think about that for a moment and invite Commissioner Fritz to come in. Commissioner.
Thank you. Just a point of information, we did add to the commanding officers' contracts, either last time or the time before, an incentive to pay a bonus if they would live in the city. That doesn't necessarily help because at that point, they've been living outside the city for a long time once they've gone up the ranks. But I mean, that's the way that we addressed what Senator Frederick was saying in terms of not being allowed to mandate it, was to provide an incentive. It seems like everything we do is often adding bonuses to contracts. I also wanted to ask the legislators, I serve on the League of Oregon Cities board, and they are realizing that something that the cities statewide obviously are seeing the demonstrations and are taking action. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, how might the League of Oregon Cities be helpful in getting some of this legislation passed? Because watching Representative Sanchez's face when Commissioner Hardesty was urging action, I don't think there's any. I think that you're definitely all ready to do that. And so how could cities be helpful?
I think that question is for Senator Frederick or Representative Bynum or anyone else who wants to chime in. Representative Sanchez, I see you're ready.
So I can appreciate that. I would really actually appreciate some support from the League of Cities. One of the bigger struggles, though, I know is that sort of our budgets are interconnected in some way, shape, or form, right? And there is, just on a whole different level, there's sometimes some fear about about doing some things in a city that might cause some damage to your budget. And I know everybody's going to be in huge fear about our budgets going forward. So I just want to say that out loud and say, it is never, I think, an intention to damage certainly cities' budgets or anybody's budgets, but we will all be in a world of hurt soon enough and needing to figure out how we manage those things and how we adjust and refine our situations. And so maybe the just overall statement is try not to be afraid and know that seriously, try not to be afraid and know that the intention is there to make this better. The reality of the situation is that something well beyond any of our control has caused us to really have to shake things up.
That's right.
And we need to be able to be brave enough to step forward and do that at this point in time.
That's right. We're depending on you. Thank you, Representative. Yes, Senator Fredericks.
Let me suggest to Commissioner Fritz that as she's talking with her fellow members of the League of Oregon Cities, that they need to sit back, come together, and individually, city after city, passing some of the bills that Portland City Council is looking at right now. Because if we get a wave of Oregon cities saying, hey, this is what we're going to do, it cannot be, it's not just a matter of cannot be ignored, that's going to be passed along to the legislature. And I've got to also say as well, one of the things that's been most interesting for me is over the last few weeks, now 2 weeks, I guess, I have had calls from a number of my Republican colleagues who are very clearly interested in the bills that we've put together, the proposals, wanting to step forward. Some of them already stepped forward on the arbitration bill, but there are others who are calling for things like the banning of chokeholds, the data system set up for discipline for police officers. They are stepping forward saying this is what they want to see happen. So it has gotten the attention of folks who would not necessarily have stepped forward, and I think we'll see some changes. Some folks who are in the same, trying to move along the same path, because it's very clear that it's not just one group. So if the League of Oregon Cities can get the folks in Bend and in Prineville and in Lakeview and in Coos Bay to step forward and say, we want these things now, that would make a big difference.
Thank you so much for that. I think you're absolutely right, Senator Frederick, because we've seen these marches all over the state of Oregon, right? This is not an urban issue. This is an issue that is touching every corner of our state. Representative Bynum.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just wanted to make a couple of points on the housing and then address the Commissioner's questions. Number one, I got information that 185 members of the Bureau out of 855 live within the city limits. And as we have these conversations about where our teachers come from, where our law enforcement members come from, we do need to be very honest about housing affordability and where people can raise families. So that's one point I wanted to make. The second point is a little bit of a stretch, but I always invite people who have behavior that is undesirable to leave. And I have yet to see cities invite people who want to continue racism, sexism, fear-mongering. How about you pass a resolution asking them to leave? Not asking people of color to go back where they came from, but asking people who don't uphold community standards of inclusion and feeling welcome to leave. So if you are an officer, if you are, I don't know, even the local restaurant owner who doesn't believe that everyone in your city, in your town, deserves to be treated fairly, deserves to have a fair shot, deserves to be protected, then they don't deserve to live in your community. What messages are you sending about inclusion? So that is, to me, very important. And we do those through resolutions. We also do those through offers for early retirement. I can encourage you to put a line item on your budget for early retirement for people who don't think that they want to move forward in the Portland Police Bureau under new standards that encourage community being fair to people in the community. So that's what I would say is what is the environment that you want to create? And then offering other people just an easy out. Bye.
Thank you, Representative. I'm going to invite Dr. Markeisha Smith. She is the Director of Equity and Human Rights for the City of Portland. We have the City Council have actually finally added teeth into the Office of Equity and Human Rights, where we will be able to hold bureaus accountable for the equitable goals that we have set as a city. How novel, right? That we're finally actually put some teeth into holding people accountable. I want to invite Dr. Smith in and see what she would like to add to this conversation. Good morning, Dr. Smith.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Appreciate the opportunity. And sorry, I've been listening in. I told Commissioner Hardesty I was having children issues this morning. We've been on the struggle bus this morning, but we're going to make it. So just quickly, I wanted to follow up on the comment that Representative Bynum just made. And it was interesting because I said something very similar to my colleagues in the directors meeting just the other day. And Elizabeth, I think, was there and can probably remember me saying that if we have this this goal, this commitment to really being an equitable city government, if we're saying that we've got these adopted racial equity goals and strategies as a city of Portland, we have this equity toolkit that we are now, through a resolution, as Commissioner Hardesty said, trying to have some teeth and hold some people accountable for some things. If we're putting all these things in place and still at the same time allowing employees to say whatever they want to say to other employees of color, do whatever they want to do, then that's really just, that's in vain. And so we have to be about the business of interrupting systems that allow these sorts of things to happen. And so I'm really concerned that, I'm hearing everyone is on board right now in their, sort of movement of their mouth. Mm-hmm. When it really comes to how are we going to change this and it's going to fundamentally shift the way that we do business, that's another conversation. And so that means we're going to have to, the barriers that we have in HR around, let's give somebody let's sit down and have a conversation with them, or let's drag this out, right? Let's continue to pay them. And we know like that has to stop, right? And I think that's a different conversation when we're talking about how we actually are, asking people to figure something out for themselves if they cannot be aligned with the direction that we're going as it relates to equity within our city government. So thank you for raising that. Something that was raised just a couple of days ago with directors. I think the other thing that I would just add is, I've been saying this for the last couple of weeks, is that it's important that we be held accountable. And so really thinking about what accountability looks like as it relates to equity. And what I'm hearing from, I've been holding a couple of meetings with our Black staff at the City of Portland. I've had a couple of listening sessions, is that they're tired, right? And they don't see the commitment that we have written in words and on paper. They're not seeing that really live out as they are trying to navigate this space as city employees. And so I think we really have to be thinking about the accountability piece. And that's something that my office, we've been having a lot of conversation about, and trying to, what does make sense, right? And how do we hold people accountable, bureaus accountable for the things that we're asking them to do? And the final point that I would just make is, we've been talking, obviously I know about policing, and some of the legislation and conversations are directed there. And, I know that you all know this, so I'm preaching to the choir, but that is one component of really what is a system that is inequitable in many, many ways. And so we've got a lot of work to do, right? And I think this is one piece of that pie, but there are many other ways in which we know a system that was not created for people of color is really continuing to oppress them. And I said in a press conference last week, it really is that we are still with a plantation mentality, like our way of doing things has not shifted in a lot of ways from the way it was when we were forcibly brought here over 400 years ago. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. And thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I appreciate it and your work.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to create some space for my colleagues to ask some additional questions. And I'd like to spend the last half hour talking about how the City Council can support you in your efforts as a special session that may or may not happen. I'm hoping it will. It keeps being moved, so I'm optimistic that there will be a special session. The special session, how can we help you do what needs to happen in a special session, and what support can we give you as you move into the January regular session? And so, but first I'm going to call on Commissioner Udaley to see if she has any comments or questions that she wants to put on the record.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. No, I've really just been listening with interest and wanting to leave as much space for the caucus to weigh in. I'm looking forward to just continued conversations. I feel like it would probably be more productive just to have staff follow up on specific items after this meeting. I like the idea of just inviting people to leave. That is very gracious. And I'm also really interested in the conversation about, the challenge of so many officers, and for that matter, firefighters that live outside of Portland. It's sometimes an economic one, but I think or economic decision, but I think it's as much of a cultural issue. And if we want more officers to live in Portland, we have to make that job, those jobs and that bureau attractive to the people that want to live in our city. And right now, I think that's a real challenge. I am curious if anyone knows. I know that other cities have rules about officers having to live within the city boundaries. Why is Portland or Oregon unique in that when we see other cities and other states able to impose that requirement? Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Fredericks.
Well, Commissioner Udaley, as I said, I think earlier, I think there was a Oregon Supreme Court ruling that said that that could not be part of, that was not allowed, that they could not require police officers or I think public employees to live in a particular jurisdiction. That was in the late 70s. Okay. That was in the late 70s, and I think it was challenged in the mid 80s as well, because of yet another incident that took place. But I don't think it was able to get reversed. So that's where we are right now. I think we need to look at that, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. That was one of the issues. That's one of the issues I think we should look at.
Great. So I'm just going to assume it's down to a state constitution issue, and it's
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Udaley. Commissioner Fritz, I want to give you the same opportunity. Or any additional questions been raised that you would like to put on the table?
I see both Representative Sanchez and Representative Meek have their hands up. And like Commissioner Udaley, I was really hoping to hear more from the caucus.
I don't know where the hands are up at, but where I am, I'm not seeing it. As long as people wave at me, I can see it. But if you're doing it and I'm not seeing any other hands. So Representative Meek, your hand was up, I understand. Somebody says.
Yeah. Sorry about that. No, I wanted to, well, a lot of the issues we're discussing are fundamental with just access and opportunity to our people of color, period. And it comes down to education, healthcare, housing, and Commissioner Udaley's been working very hard on housing, and that's one of my specialties. And what what my experience has been that because we have disinvested in our education system for way too long, that our families are not educated to fill some of the jobs that are available here in Oregon. And part of the issue of even access to affordable housing is that our communities, our corporations, and even our public unions are hiring from outside of our community, because unfortunately we don't have qualified candidates to fill some of those positions. And I think that it's going to be a practice of both our companies, our businesses, if we can provide a better education system for our families and our communities of color, you will have a better pool of applicants in which to hire within our communities. And so it's a unfortunate vicious cycle that it's gonna take a lot of work, but that's what I've been seeing. A lot of our affordability issues is that we have people moving in to our communities, filling these wonderful jobs that are displacing folks that live and were born and raised in our communities. So I just wanted to put that on the record. The issues we're dealing with are multifaceted, and we're going to have a lot of work to do to make some systemic changes for people of color in our whole communities.
Thank you, Representative Meek. I think what you've done is actually articulated just how big the issue is. Every institution that we have in Oregon was built on a basis of white supremacy. So whether we talk education, housing, economic prosperity, home ownership, across the board, right? So even though we are focused today on policing, the reality is that every single one of our institutions must be redesigned so that it addresses and works for people of color who live in Oregon. And again, today we're very narrowly focused, but thank you for broadening the perspective, because even if we do everything to fix police in a year, all the other systems are still inequitable, right? And we can't fix one system without really looking across the board at all the inequities that exist and coming up with a plan on how we're going to tackle it. And I know it's overwhelming, right? I have no qualms. I know you can't just wave a magic wand and fix 400 years of unequitable outcomes, right? But I think it would be very helpful if the legislative leadership came out with some proposals about how we're going to tackle these institutional structures one by one. Senator Fredericks, you look like you might want to weigh in.
Well, there are a couple of things that I wanted to say. First of all, Representative Meek, I think we have to have a good long conversation, especially about education. You're on target, but I think that the whole virus and COVID crisis, the crisis related to what's taken place in terms of police accountability, all have actually have actually gotten a chance for us to look more clearly at those holes, at those discrepancies, that disparity for health, education, economic security, housing. All of those things are now very clearly in front of us. So the next steps that we have to really relate to that. When we look at the COVID, we have a special session, and a good deal of it is going to be about the whole virus issue and how the state responds. But we saw at the very beginning, as soon as the federal government put money out, supposedly in a stimulus package, the people who did not get it were clearly low income and especially minority business people. They did not get this. And part of the reason they didn't get it was because of past relationships with banks. And if you didn't have a relationship with a bank, you couldn't get connected with that. This is all part of a tapestry of programs and problems that we've been dealing with. Now they're set up and very clearly in front of us. So we're going to be needing to look at that. But the police accountability component and the justice accountability component is something that we're going to have to be looking at very clearly. And I want to thank you again for having this kind of a forum for us to bring these things forward, especially with the city of Portland. Thank you very much, Commissioner Hardesty.
You are very welcome, Senator Frederick. Anyone else? Representative Sanchez, please.
So I just want to follow up on those pieces a little bit because, that it's very, very, very true. We're looking at a wider systemic issue. You talked about that for 500 years from a Native perspective plus, where we have a system of law that was not designed for us as, people of color, Indigenous people, African American, nobody. It wasn't designed for us. It wasn't designed for women. I mean, that is the reality of the situation. Our system of law was designed for men with money. And this is hugely systemic. And it's also a big rock that is going to take some work to move, right? And what it's also going to take, and I'm going to put my social worker hat on and say, it's also going to be very, very difficult on a lot of levels, right? Because we can try to move certain things here and there and readjust on, on that sort of that policing or, all of that level. And we've been trying to readjust on housing. We've been trying to readjust on social services. We've been trying to readjust on education. We've been hitting this from lots of different angles over and over again. And sometimes we are able to really move some great things, and sometimes we're not. The fact that we moved Senate Bill 13, a couple of years ago around, putting some real foundation of Native education and helping people understand, like, this is where, these are we are as Indigenous people in terms of education. As we're moving all of that stuff, that makes people uncomfortable because then it shifts that whole sort of thought process of like, what about me? It puts people in power who've been in power for a very, very long time in an uncomfortable space, and they do not even know how to articulate it.
Yes.
So that's kind of what I was referring to with regard to the League of Oregon Cities and any one of those power structures, any one of them, not them in particular, but any one of those types of power structures that all of a sudden are going to recognize, oh, this is going to change. And there may be a lot of us who want this change and want to shift this change. And it's not just people of color, it's other people, you know, obviously around the country, around the world, who want this change to shift, but it's going to be uncomfortable. It is going to be scary. It is going to be difficult. And I just want to caution people to sort of, you know, think about how we do that, how we have those conversations. I appreciate very much Janelle saying, invite them to leave. It's a sweet invitation. And I always love that about Janelle, you know, especially we're in the same committee. She's very delicate about the way she does things. I'm going to slam it down, you know how it is. But
I could learn a thing or two from.
I'm telling you. Yep. Because she sits right next to me and asks the question very innocently and sweetly, and I'm going, "What the hell's going on?" You know, we have had that situation, but yes. I'm very cognizant of the fact that these are difficult conversations going forward. You know, and we just need to be cautious and think about them and really help people recognize this is a big rock that has needed to move for a very, very long time, and if you help me move it, we can maybe put it in the right spot to where it's not going to hurt anybody. It's not going to fall on anybody. It's not going to crack apart and be a detriment to everyone. We're going to be able to build something really great with this big rock, whatever it is. We're going to be able to do that if people will think about that and recognize that our intention is not to slam all the other folk, right? Our intention is to make sure that the communities of color and people who have struggled all this time have an opportunity to make that, that Constitution work for everybody, not just the people who are written in it.
Hear, hear. Any ideas about changing the acoustics at the state capitol? You're on mute, Senator Frederick.
I'm not sure which acoustics what acoustics are you talking about?
I'm talking about all those white men on the wall at the state capitol when you walk in. If you are a person of color, you certainly don't feel welcome when you walk into the state capitol, and every portrait is of old white people that nobody knows. And I'm just wondering if in this moment, there's an opportunity to actually change what people see, especially when we encourage more people of color to come into the legislative body to have their voice heard. As someone who's served in that body, I can tell you, boy, those pictures, I kept thinking, who are these old white people, right? It's like, and why is that what everybody sees when they walk in the door of the state capitol, right? I hope you will consider that it is time to take those pioneers down and actually make the state capitol reflective of the equity and diversity that is so beautiful throughout the state of Oregon.
Well, I agree with you. The search, you walk into the rotunda and you see two Black faces there. One of the sailor who you don't have a name for, who was on the ship that came through, and the other one is, of course, of York for the Lewis and Clark expedition, and that's it. We did do something a couple of years ago, and it took quite a bit to do it. We did manage to say that the Confederate flag that was the basis for the Mississippi, the state of Mississippi, that came down from the park area that had flags. And so that took a while to get done, but we did manage to get that done. There are a lot, this symbolism is a key element of politics no matter what. And so we need to find a way to, as you say, make sure that we start to include folks, and we'll see how far that goes. I don't know, but thank you for bringing that up. We'll see what happens.
Thank you, Representative Bynum.
Thank you, Commissioner. I've had quite a few people reach out and ask what they can do. I believe the Capitol Foundation is in charge of the artwork that is in the Capitol. And if they have spare money from a stimulus check they did not need, they could donate to the Capitol Foundation. We also have opportunities for people to be docents and information guides. We don't have a lot of brown faces, multi-language speakers in the Capitol. If people want to come down and be a part of the volunteer corps that sits at our information desk, I think it's so important that not only do we look at what is on the walls, we look at who is in the body.
Right.
And I know it's refreshing when I can see a brown face come in, but how do we greet people when they come in the door? How do we make sure that they know that this is their capital? And these are the things that, you know, I've been talking about with the speaker and our leadership. You know, even I was asked whose desk I was trying to get to when I was on the House floor. And I was just like, look at this face, my desk, remember this face. And so there are things that people can do. And I always want to make sure that I'm channeling people to some actionable items. If they want to donate, if they want to get involved with the Capitol Foundation, if they want to suggest some African American or some Latinx or some Native artists. Many of them flow through the governor's office. She has a rotating exhibition, and that's where I've seen the most diverse art. But if they want to help reframe what the Capitol looks like, that's a good place to start.
Thank you so much, Representative. And I would just say that I would make sure that I market for art that reflects the diversity of our state, right? I would not want to ask anybody to give money to the Capitol Foundation for them to maintain the status quo that they have. So my addendum to your request would be, and make sure you tell them how you want them to spend it, right? Thank you very much. You know, I'll tell you the story. There was someone that insisted that I was Margaret Carter, one of the young volunteers that was bringing a group of people through the Capitol. And they went, oh, here comes Representative Margaret Carter. And I was trying to save the young woman. I said, no, in fact, I am not Margaret Carter. And she said, yes, you are. And I went, well, now. So just want you to know that I've had that lived experience myself. I told her that if I started singing, she would be really clear that I was not Margaret Carter. Okay, so we are now down to about 15 minutes left. And I do not want to leave this conversation without you telling us how we could be most helpful. And I'm talking to the governor regularly. I'm talking to the Speaker of the House. I've not been able to connect with the Senate President, but please let me and my colleagues know how we could be most helpful, both in a special session and then again as January comes around for the regular session. Senator Fredericks?
Thank you. I think that the key is going to be sustaining the kind of effort that we see across the state.
Yes.
It's, you know, there are folks who are hoping that this is just a news cycle event.
Right.
That people will forget this and move on to something new, whatever that might be. And they really desperately want to see that happen as quickly as possible. It hasn't happened yet. But there are going to be folks who are going to want to do that. So the real key for me is to make sure that people who are outside of Portland continue to get in contact with their representatives, their city council people, their county commissioners, and say, we have to have this change. This has to be a change, and continue to do that. But for folks who are in Portland, the city council has heard you clearly. They're out in front talking about this, but they need to know it's oftentimes that you do need to preach to the choir. So I think it's going to be important for that to continue to happen. So if we can make sure that letters and notes and Zoom calls, because that's what we tend to be dealing with primarily these days, that they hear that this has to change. It's going to be difficult, as a number of people have said, but it is time. We've had enough time to try to give the benefit of the doubt to folks. No longer. You're not getting the benefit of the doubt anymore. We need to step forward, and we need to have that as an echo throughout the state. But that has to come from the general community.
Thank you for that. Representative Bynum, you wanted to weigh in?
Yes, thank you. And I have to leave for my next appointment, so I wanted to get mine in really quickly here. Number one, to me, there is no action that is more important as a citizen here than voting. You have an election coming up, I believe, in August, if I remember correctly, and there's another one in November.
In August, yes.
So if people are not registered to vote, there is no excuse in Oregon not to vote.
That's right.
Even if you're voting on just one thing and you don't understand the rest of the ballot, just vote for one thing and get that habit in. It's great for people to march. That's wonderful. But when people contact me and they tell me they don't vote, that's a different conversation. So I'd say that. The second one is get in touch with your state legislators, your senator and your representative. They may be of different parties. Those of you who are represented by me in East Portland, Chuck Thompson is your Republican senator out in Hood River. You need to get in touch with both of us. The third thing is people need to learn how to use the OLIS system, Oregon Legislative Information System, so they can learn how to write in, they can learn how to testify, they can learn how to watch us do our business, and they can put pressure on us to do the things that they want. It is not, being active is not a passive activity. It's not about being an internet warrior. It's not about putting up memes. It's not about, calling out people, call out culture online. It's really about voting. It's about sending in your testimony, and it's about making real suggestions that we can act on. So that is how you as a city council can help us. That is how the people of Portland can help us. And I promise to do my very best to listen to my constituents and keep fighting the good fight. So thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate you being here, Representative, and the incredible work that you have been leading in the legislature. And just know we got your back. And feel free to call us to come and testify, even if it's Zoom, so that we can add our voices to the incredible work that you're doing. So enjoy your next meeting. Thank you so much for being here. Representative Lauren Spence.
Thank you, Commissioner. I really wanted to bring home one of the key points when we talk about what City Council can do and then what our citizens can do. One of the things that before I was a legislator, I was on the Planning Commission, and I came in front of you guys and I testified about residential infill.
Yes.
And one of the things that we all have to do is be cognizant, again, like Rep. Meek was saying, and we're all saying that this is a structural issue. And at every turn, when you're looking to densify your community, when you're looking to include more people in your community, we need our whole city to show up for that. It is not enough to march and say that you care about Black lives, but you don't want them to be your neighbors. You don't want us to be your neighbors, right? And so it's about those kinds of concerted efforts. It's about being civically engaged. It is our job. That is part of the social contract, right? Is that we are cognizant of what is happening. We are making sure that our voices are being heard. I know that over, 1,000 people signed up for testimony. Yes, we need that in a sustained way, right? We need people to really show up and put that pressure on City Council as well as on the legislature. One of the things that I am adamant about is reparative justice. Right? So it's about knowing that all of our communities have suffered human rights violations at the hands of the state and being committed to making amends, being committed to redistribution, whether that looks like residential infill or something else, right? It's about us all being committed to getting a little, especially people who have never been uncomfortable, getting uncomfortable. And so in the name of justice, right? And so for me, it's about all of these things and thinking about, making sure that we maintain these relationships, right? That when you have something, you guys have proposed legislation to us, right? And a lot of times the legislature, the state body, is not very visible. People can recognize you on the street and they don't recognize Senator Frederick. They don't recognize Representative Bynum. They don't recognize us, right? So sometimes you guys are the conduit for issues that, you know, it's our job, but you become that conduit to lead people to us, to say, here, this is where you need to go to get this type of work done. And so, and the third thing I want to say is talking about our young people. I think that this generation, and I'm very young myself, but I'm a millennial, and I think Gen Z is extremely active and they're extremely unapologetic and they're abolitionists and they don't want police reform. They want us to have a radical reimagining of what it looks like to have communities be truly in charge of what their outcomes are, what true rehabilitation means. You know, and so I want us to continue to prop them up. I have a weekly meeting with young people where we're helping them navigate the system. I want our electeds to partner with them, to bring them into this, to help them understand that creating legislation is not tricky. You start with an idea and LC helps you, Legislative Council helps you work through that concept, right? There's nothing special about being an elected. You don't need a high school diploma. You just need to be passionate. And so I think we need to do a better job of bringing down these barriers and bringing more people into the fold. I know that we're going to have a lot more people of color, legislators of color, coming into the fold come January 20th. And you guys are going to have a shaking up yourself. The first Latinx woman has been elected, right? Unofficially, but she will be elected to the city council. And so these are the types of sustained changes that we need to have to ensure that this is not a wrinkle in time, that this will be a sustained movement, that we're not going to forget that this is something that we have to commit to and continue to work through for the next year or 2 or 5, et cetera, because it took centuries to create this system, and it's going to take just even more concerted and dedicated time to dismantle it.
Thank you, Representative. And last but certainly not least, Representative Meek, how can we support your efforts?
Well, thank you. I just follow through with all the great statements that our other representatives and senators have said, that this is a partnership. And one of the things you have to be and continue to be that catalyst, that igniter that won't allow us to work on the next biggest issue, because there will be one.
Yes.
And how do we, keep our focus on this very, very important process? And like we've gone through a lot of some of the issues that have brought us here for the inequities of our citizens anyway, for hundreds and hundreds and generations, hundreds of years and generations of inequities. And we have to start with one thing and focus on that, and let's get this done first. And we will be working on other priorities, but like Representative Lawrence Spence said, that we need your continued, ignition to make sure that we are focused on that we don't work on the newest, purple out there that's come along. And we are definitely here for that. And we have to strike while the iron's hot right now. And I think we can really make a big change. Just for the safety of our community to begin with. And people start to feel more comfortable and safe in their own environment and in their own communities, then they have a little more hope to go out there and succeed in different ways. So thank you. I look forward to continuing to work with our city and our communities.
Well, I thank you all. And I just want to lift up Elizabeth Edwards, who has been doing just amazing work representing us at the legislative body. She is normally the easiest person to connect with when a legislative session is happening, and she will make sure that we have the information we need to be able to weigh in on the issues that you will be dealing with in the legislative body. I hope today that we will make you proud with our votes this afternoon as we start reimagining community safety in the city of Portland. And as you know, It's just the first step. The budget is just one piece of the transformation that must happen so that community feels that they are able to use all our first responders in a way that does not put their life at risk. Now is our time. The community is demanding it. And I can't wait to see what we develop together. And I want to say to Representative Lawrence Spence, please invite me to come to one of your meetings with the young people. Nothing I like more than hanging out with young people who are on fire and who want to change the world. So please let me know how I can be helpful, and we will make sure to, I would look forward to that. I want to thank each and every one of you for making time for this really important conversation. And I want to challenge you to not let this be the last time that we come together and plot and plan about how to make our state more just and more equitable for all its people. I am very, very appreciative of all the work you do every single day, because I know you're on the front line and you're getting a lot of grief, both about the pandemic and how that's impacting communities of color. And you're going to be getting a lot of grief about the economic devastation that all of our communities will be experiencing. And now, on top of that, you have a revolution taking place where people are demanding real action real soon from their elected leaders. We have our work cut out for us, but I'm absolutely confident that we are the right people for this time to make these changes happen. Have a fabulous day, good people, and we will be talking soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We
Thank
are
you.
officially adjourned. Thank you. Appreciate all of your time today. We're officially adjourned from our work session. Thank you.